Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show for the week of 14 November 2021. Satoshi Nakamoto, weird sex objects, teaching hackers, FatPipe, banks, Win11, glitch, and Perswaysion. All this on the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show. On Application Security Weekly number 174, John and Mike had Ryan Lloyd, the Chief Product Officer at GuardSquare, on first. Ryan was going to talk about tools and techniques that are used to compromise mobile environments. And in particular, they were talking about how to harden mobile apps against threats, which is a very, germane and current topic, because more and more I get calls from people saying, I get this on my phone now, And of course, as people have migrated so much of what they do onto mobile devices, all these mobile app things have become bigger targets and, of course, bigger threats. In the second segment, disclosure decisions and CVE 2021-3064, technical details behind Chaos DB and Azure, fuzzing BusyBox, Prosimo and Rust, vulnerabilities in Nucleus RTOs, and HTML smuggling. On Business Security Weekly number 239, Ben, Jason, and Matt talk with Tony Cole, the CTO at Ativo Networks. Tony was talking about how identity services like Active Directory are a target when an initial endpoint is compromised. So that's somebody breaks in, they get on a desktop or some other device, and then they go right after those AD servers, because guess what? That's where all the goodies are. And some of the reasons that defenders fail to focus on this area, which to me really starts turning back into a trust issue, because you're talking about how you trust that device because you think it's a valid endpoint, and then it gets compromised and they go after the AD, which is trusting that device, and how that should change. In the second segment, the Gardener, 4 attributes of a great leader. I don't probably have any of those. Except the sexy one. Unpacking 5 myths about management, 5 cybersecurity myths that make you more vulnerable to attacks, and more news stories there. On Enterprise Security Weekly 251, Adrian, Katie, and Tyler Shields had Mike Campfield, the VP and General Manager of International and Global Security Programs at ExtraHop. Mike was talking about ransomware, obviously a big topic these days, and how it just keeps getting worse, another big topic these days. It's definitely one of those things that has gotten worse and keeps getting worse. They talked about the cost of ransomware and how it is now approaching at $20 billion expenditure a year just on ransomware. The segment offered a retrospective on what happened with ransomware in 2021, predictions about 2022, and where it may go after that, and also about what kind of controls you should be putting in place to try to build resilience. Very, current, a very topical segment. In the second segment, Jeffrey Smith, managing partner at Cyber Risk Underwriters, joined the show to talk about cyber insurance. Again, a very topical thing that I get calls about this all the time, and how that is, how that's evolving. So cyber insurance has been changing a lot over the last couple of years. Initially, it was a thing. Then now it became like, well, wow, we can't insure that because it's going to cost too much. And, what do we do in the future? They also had audience questions for Jeffrey. So interesting stuff there. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 95, Flea, Jeff, Kat Valentine, and Liam Downward had Chris Lehr, the Executive Vice President and CTO at Solace Security. Chris was on talking about CISA's guidance for managed service providers and how they should approach security for their operations, because that is starting to, as lawyers and courts and other people have learned about all these different kind of things in cyber, that turns into lawsuits and so forth. They also talked about mitigation and hardening guidelines that MSPs should be using, and the problems that MSPs and SMBs face to get the correct level of their security for their organizations while still being in compliance. And by correct level, they obviously mean, where do you stop? How secure is secure enough? How much risk are you going to accept and so on? But you got to stay in compliance if you're one of these types of businesses. But you also have to stay in business. That's Security Weekly News number 167. The amazing Aaron Leyland provided one of the most epic rants in the history of Security Weekly News about the meaning of the word meta, how it applied in the Facebook case, and pretty much everything you would ever want to know about the word meta and everything you would expect of Aaron. So you should definitely check that out. On Paul's Security Weekly number 719, first up was a cool segment about building vulnerable targets. I get this question a lot. From students and from other people about how do I build like a vulnerable network that I can then test things, test exploits and so forth. And this segment on Security Weekly was about how to build those kind of vulnerable targets using Docker. So Dockerizing this stuff means you can do it faster, you can reset it quicker, you can build an endless array of things to target. Paul then went ahead and demonstrated the default password finder that they had put together on earlier episodes of Paul's Security Weekly, and some vulnerable tools that provided cool ways to build these kind of lab environments for your own amusement. All the code, of course, was shared, so you can get on there. The links are on the show notes, and it's a fun segment. On the second segment, Derek Rook joined the show. Derek is the senior director of the Purple team at Teradata and a SANS certified instructor. The segment was a discussion about how to capture the flags and some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about building one. Again, questions we all get a lot. People want to have these for various and sundry clubs, groups, schools, etc. They did talk about computer fundamentals that are undervalued when entering the security field, which I thought was quite interesting because all these were questions I get all the time. What skills should people have? What kind of things should they, what should you learn and so forth? And of course, the third segment was the news. My thread of the week came from an article that was on Security Weekly about teaching hackers. It's not really a threat as much as it was just sort of a discussion for me. This was based on an article by Jeremy Miller that I linked in the show notes, and you can read. I don't know if you know this, but way back in the before four times, I actually set up a program to try to teach students security. And this was in Colorado, and I called the class that I set up Hacking 101, and the lab was called the Hacker Lab. It got a lot of bad press. And it got a lot of bad publicity as a result of that bad press and the name. And I got called before the state legislature. That was a state-funded school, so the state legislature had control over curriculum, and they didn't like it. But I really liked this article about teaching hackers. So when we get new students at the university, and I will say this about this seems to have started improving. For a long time, a lot of new students that were coming to the university interested in security programs didn't really have a clear vision of what that meant in terms of what they would be doing with their lives or what they were going to learn and so forth. But it does seem to be improving more. I think there's more education now in middle and high school about this. There's stuff like Cyber Patriot and other types of clubs and events and things. And not to mention there's a lot more video, kind of stuff on YouTube, like this show and Security Weekly and so forth, that let people kind of get an understanding of what it means to be a hacker, in quotes, and what it means to work in the field of cybersecurity. But for a long time, most of the students that we were getting had no background in this, which always surprised me because they could get the background if they went out and sought it out. And they were coming in with these visions of wearing like leather dusters and shouting, "I'm in!" to, various shirtless individuals who were watching them steamily. Or maybe that was porn. I'm not sure, but I think that was what they were getting. They had this sort of movie Hollywood vision of this, and we got that a lot. I got a lot of students who were coming in saying, "Hey, I want to be," and I'm not even making this up. I had a student once who came in and said, "What I want to be is a genius who works for the FBI on the back end so that when agents are out on the street and they need to like break into the DMV or hack the Pentagon to get information about a suspect, I'm the person who does that." And I was just like, okay, you want to be an actor, not an actual person in this field. I mean, there's a lot of ultimate nerd fantasy stuff that's promulgated by movies like War Games and Hackers and William Gibson and Neil Stephenson, who I like very much, and I like those movies too, but they don't portray this very accurately. Gibson always had, sweaty nerds with decks breaking into things, and Stephenson had, sweaty nerds with samurai swords breaking into things. And for the longest time, I think that was the idea a lot of young students had about the whole security profession, that they would be cool instead of nerdy, and they would break into things and shout, "I'm in." And that was sort of where they were trying to go with it. And I mean, we all know this is not the nature of cybersecurity. And the hard truth when we think about how we all got here is mostly through a lot of hard work and studying things and breaking things and fixing them. Maybe not even for the purpose of cybersecurity, but a lot of times gamers got into cybersecurity because they broke a lot of systems, and they had to fix those systems or try to mod those systems so that they would work for some game they were trying to play or whatever. And then they had to apply all these things to business practice. And that's how a lot of us got here, was by working on this stuff unendingly. And I was telling a parent who asked me about this once that it was kind of like race car drivers, a lot of whom, were mechanics and things, and they knew a lot about these cars and so forth. And, and they sort of evolved into, these sort of celebrity drivers or whatever. But, to me, more time in cybersecurity is spent writing analysis or examining artifacts than shouting, "I'm in." I don't think I've ever shouted, "I'm in." You do get a sense of satisfaction if you get into a system or something like that through an exploit or through, being clever. But at the end of the day, you spent more time learning how to think that way. So this article talks about teaching hacking and how it's not what people want, because what they want is they want a recipe book. They want somebody to sit them down and hand them a book like the Happy Hacker's Guide to Mostly Harmless Hacking, which says type this and then type that and this will happen. And that's not really how cybersecurity works at all. And students really want that because it's easy, right? You hand somebody a checklist and say, do all these things and you'll be a superstar. That isn't how any kind of superstar stuff actually works. But it's really more of a journey in investigation, understanding, and acquiring knowledge that allows for somebody to think of new ways to explore a machine. I mean, I really like that idea in this article. I mean, if somebody tells you just to type X, Y, and Z, and then and you shout "I'm in" and everything's done, and you get to go be cool in the lobby or whatever, that's just completely unrealistic. I mean, you're basically turning out, if you do that, you're basically turning out students that can't really think. All they're going to be able to do is click the clown's mouth at the proper time. When the red light goes on, click here. And we do see stuff like that in the industry. But you really need to be teaching people how to explore a problem. And that's where programming and math or music, and that's why those are hard, right? Because when you start I've taught programming for years. When you teach people programming, guess what? A lot of them drop out because they find out that it's not just type this and then type that and it'll all work. It's about exploring it and understanding it. And even music is like that. And you could teach somebody how to play Bach on a clavichord, but teaching somebody music and then having them write new music is a whole different animal. Memorizing a scale and playing it back, that's pretty easy. You could teach almost anybody to do that. But trying to mod that scale into some new pattern that's actually appealing to people using other scales and modes and all that kind of stuff takes a lot of knowledge and experience. And it's just like hacking. Hacking is about exploration and then applying that deeper knowledge to investigate around a corner. Maybe you don't go around the corner. Maybe you go over the wall. Maybe you take some C4 and get rid of the corner and the wall altogether. But you still have to find a way around. And in order to think like that, you have to really understand the machine. And that brought up a lot of questions in the article about the machine and what do you know about the machine? Do you understand the machine? Do you get that deeper idea? And if you don't, you probably will just be looking for a way that is, set up in a checklist, not some new way that basically means you're going to be back to just playing that same old scale over and over again. I thought about that a lot when I was reading this paper. I was thinking about skills I learned and skills I acquired, and the ones that I acquired were the ones that I used the most, not the ones that I just learned in a book or I read about. It was really about trying things. And I want to play a video game on an old Tandy 1000 PC, and it doesn't have enough RAM. The only way to increase the RAM was to desolder and resolder some chips, so I had to learn how to solder. And then I had to fix all the problems that resulted in me melting the boards and breaking the chips and all this kind of stuff. But all that stuff made me start learning that wrecking process, taught me how to think about things differently when I wanted to do something. You want to try to install an operating system on a BIOS that couldn't run it. Like I tried to install OS 2. And I spent a lot of time trying to get that to work. And developing those sorts of skills led me to work on understanding how OSs work and how file systems work and how to mod that stuff so that it might just work. How could I cheat it so that it thought it was doing what it one of the things OS 2 wanted was it had to have ECC RAM, and I didn't have ECC RAM. And I never got it to work, but I spent a whole bunch of time trying to fake it. And, I never got that to work, but I sure did learn a lot while I was trying to find my way through that. I mean, just look at a hard drive with a hex editor is a deeper understanding of how file systems work. So those are the things you acquire. And then you can use those things when you need to investigate a new machine or a new system that you don't know anything about. So how do you teach that? And I think it starts with somebody who's interested in more than just getting the 10 points on the quiz and by pointing at the USB connector to get the 10 points. They really want to know how that USB connector works, or what happens if you plug it into a different kind of port, or you cut the wire and rewire it yourself. Oh, it's broken. It doesn't work now. But how can I get it working again, because I don't have any money to go buy a new one? So because of that, we got to instill that sense of exploration in students and not just give them slide decks of lecture notes, but rather we got to encourage them to solve the problems and think. Now, I hate to tell you this, but that is hard. It will get you in all kinds of trouble because no one wants to see students flunking out or changing majors, and all that's going to happen if you do it right. Not everybody's cut out to do this crazy job where everything changes constantly. You won't master it because by the time you understand Windows 9, Windows Sun Stallion will be released. I'm suggesting that as a name, guys. Windows Sun Stallion. And once that happens, all bets are off. So the people that just want to memorize a bunch of steps and then lather, rinse, repeat forever, now they're going to get really frustrated, and employers are going to get really frustrated with them as well. That's why successful hackers are creative. They're different, sometimes weird and unusual. I like those kind of things, and most of you do too. Those people are going to be the ones that break it. They're going to fix it in some weird way. And you go, wow, that's not how I would have fixed that. And they go, so what? My way works. So if you want to teach hacking, well, you're going to have to teach people how to learn. And you're going to have to teach them to explore and learn, not just memorize the 32 parts of the MIS. Good luck. Sorry, I can't compete with Aaron on rants. I mean, that's I could go on for a while, but I'm not going to. But, so if you did miss Aaron on Tuesday, you should definitely watch that. He's great at that. Anyway, and now the news. The FBI announced that an advanced persistent threat group had been exploiting FatPipe virtual private VPN network devices to access internal networks since at least May. The FBI released a flash alert on Tuesday that reported a 0-day in the FatPipe MPVPN device software that went back to at least May of 2021. FatPipe did patch this bug this week, so if you are using their equipment and you haven't patched, well, now's the time. The vulnerability is found in the Warp WAN redundancy product, the MPVPN router clustering device, and the IPVPN load balancing and reliability device for VPNs. The vulnerability is listed. It doesn't even have a CVE number yet, but it's listed as FPSA006 by FatPipe, and it allows exploitation of file uploading into the firmware. And if they can do that, they can install a web shell, and the web shell that can be installed under this vulnerability has root access. Ouch. The flaw is caused by input and validation checking on some types of HTTP requests. So please patch this, because that would be bad. And most organizations tend to trust their VPN, so patch. The United States federal bank regulators have approved a new rule which will require banks to notify their primary federal regulator, whoever that may be, of any significant computer incidents within 36 hours. The previous requirement only requires that they report major cyber attacks if they are likely to impact or have impacted the operations of the bank. So this is a big change. The new regulation also requires bank service providers to notify customers as soon as possible if a cyber attack materially affected or will likely affect the customers for 4 or more hours. So this is a fairly significant change for banking. Examples of the required reporting included large-scale distributed denial of service. Compliance with this regulation will be required by, wait for this, May 2022. So they don't want to move very fast there. We wouldn't want to force them to do anything quickly. Microsoft has started pushing Windows 11 rollouts at a faster pace. Microsoft said there had been few problems with the rollout so far. They'd been testing machines with update and determining your machine was qualified, and then they go ahead and offer you the update. I did do one of my laptops. It got a notification. I had it running, and it popped up and said it was available for Windows 11. So I said, okay, sure, why not? And I did go ahead and do it. Hasn't seemed to have any real issues so far that I can see. Of course, it's behind firewalls and so forth. So if there are security flaws, we haven't seen them yet. But I've been letting it run. It's been, I think, a couple of weeks now. It's been sitting there with Windows 11 on it. Microsoft pushed out a PC health check diagnostic tool on October 22nd that you can run if you want to test your machine to see if it's eligible to update. But currently, the update will just likely arrive on your machine via the normal update process. If you have automatic updating turned on, it will alert you that it wants to update to Windows 11, and then your machine will say, please update me, and I guess you could choose not to if you would like to do that. Glitch is a cloud service that allows you to create websites and has a demo mode that allows for a free 5-minute demo. So you can build a website, put it up for 5 minutes, and then it times out. You can restart it manually. As such, phishing attackers have been using the platform to create a very short lifespan site that would help to avoid detection because it doesn't exist for very long. And, you know, if it's like that, a lot of software won't detect that. It won't be on any blocking list or anything like that. Domain Tools reported this campaign started in July 2021. It is an email with attachments that are, you know, essentially phishing emails, but they don't have any like malware type content in them. They do have a PDF. The PDF has no malicious code in it. It just has a link to one of these sites. It doesn't get blocked or anything like that because it's a PDF. Once you go to that page, it basically displays a nice landing page, which looks exactly like one of the normal sites. Domain Tools also found that commercial malware sandboxing services had SharePoint phishing pages and pages with obfuscated JavaScript, which would exfiltrate credentials and so forth. So a big mess here. But Glitch is it's a very commonly used service for hosting. And it has not been known as a hosting site for malware and such, so it's not typically blocked. But that 5-minute lifespan and that free option are always going to be appealing to this kind of usage. Perswaysion, and yes, it's spelled that way, is a long-lived phishing kit. It's been around for a long time. It's been used in thousands of phishing campaigns around the world over the years. The toolkit is designed to allow for rapid development or rapid deployment of phishing campaigns and typically uses Microsoft file sharing services like Sway, SharePoint, and OneNote. Maybe they'll start using Glitch, but this is typically used Microsoft, in particular, Sway. They lure users to phishing landing pages. Security.io performed an analysis of the Perswaysion, and they were the ones that named it that too. And of course, the Sway is in there because of Microsoft Sway. And it basically shows that this thing's been being used as far back as October of 2017 and is still actively being used. URL scans showed that over the last 18 months, 7,403, that's an exact count, 7,403 people across 14 different industry sectors had arrived at one of the 444 unique Perswaysion portals. This did include U.S. government, financial, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, you name it, all industries all the way around the world. Group IB is a security vendor. They named this the group Perswaysion because of their heavy use of Sway. A file sharing and Sway, if you don't know, is a file sharing service that was a major component of the attacks, but it's not the only approach they use. So they are using other Microsoft platforms. Basically, the attack uses a spear phishing email with a PDF, again, that has a link to a Microsoft file sharing notification, so it doesn't tend to get flagged, and it sends you to some Microsoft file sharing service that looks exactly like the real file sharing service, except it's not. And of course, you get your credentials harvested when you go there, so be aware. Now, I got to actually talk to Craig Wright once for a little bit. I was at, this was a long time ago, back in like 2004, 2005, and we were doing some stuff with forensics that Craig got interested in, and that resulted in Craig Wright buying an electron microscope and taking on this professor who was slamming this paper that I wrote. I wrote a very simple paper for auditing purposes, and Craig and Dave Kleiman got interested in it, and I was actually sitting at a table with them backstage I think it was at a Sands thing, and we got to talk for a while. And I had known Dave Kleiman before that because he was involved in the forensics community quite a bit. And anyway, my drive wiping paper got their attention. It got this other professor in Australia upset, and Craig and Dave went after him. And there was a whole long story I could tell you about that. But it ended up being a pretty cool story with them taking this guy on. And it was all via some grad student who might have actually been the professor. It's not. It was a Professor Gutman. And Professor Gutman was this guy who developed all this stuff about examining hard drive platters with electron microscopes and trying to recreate the data. And I didn't agree with that on modern drives, and Craig and Dave actually went after him. But anyway, the story is about there's a lawsuit in Florida. And so Dave Kleiman died in 2013, and Dave's family's estate is suing Craig Wright. And these two worked on a lot of stuff together, so there's a lot of pubs out there from them. But Dave's estate is suing Craig Wright over something pretty valuable, a Bitcoin wallet that contains a lot of Bitcoins, pretty much about 1 million Bitcoins, not $1 million, 1 million Bitcoins. And that's about $64 billion. And supposedly this wallet belonged to the, now immortalized Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, if you don't know the whole story, well, Satoshi Nakamoto is this shadowy figure that supposedly invented Bitcoin. And in 2016, Craig Wright claimed that he is Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, later he turned around and made this big, long, mea culpa apology about he wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. And you can go read all that long National Enquirer type history. But Craig kept claiming he was Satoshi, and the estate now of Dave Kleiman claims that the two of them together were Satoshi Nakamoto. And as such, that the estate should get half of the Bitcoin wallet. Now, apparently, the Kleiman plaintiffs are saying they're going to provide proof of all this, and they claim they have evidence that there was a partnership to mine all these Bitcoin and that Dave and Craig were both involved in it. The proof, of course, is going to have to be the legendary private key, Yuli's Gold. There's a private key for this Bitcoin wallet that controls the Nakamoto account, which has apparently not been touched in all these years. So the whole mystery started in 2008. And someone claiming to be Nakamoto sent a 9-page paper to a bunch of crypto people that describe Bitcoin. Now, Dave died in 2013, but I will say, from having had some brief interaction with both of those people back in the early 2000s, it did sound like something they would do, and it did sound like something they were capable of doing. Now, there's some other people who don't agree with that. They don't claim that Craig is, that Craig is capable of this, and Craig has been called a con man by a couple of other people. And Craig Wright is certainly no stranger to getting involved in these contentious situations. I can't attest to that, but I do know that I knew Dave pretty well, and Dave was certainly smart enough to do this. So who knows? We'll keep watching. I assure you, Dave would be enjoying the circus if he was able to see it. And finally, John Varley is a brilliant writer from way back in the 70s and always had a lot of interest in sci-fi sex stuff, body swapping and sex swapping and all these kind of things. But he never really went into the VR kind of space. He was more of a realist kind of writer. He should have. I think John, if I know you're still out there, so maybe, now's the time for John Varley and Neil Stephenson to co-author something about this. Or you could just read this story. A sex psychologist named Kathleen Smooze decided that they could use virtual reality to have some kind of VR sex thing, but they were going to use non-human avatars. So in one of their first experiences that they documented here, they used a chest of drawers, which is like a piece of furniture, and a TV set. Now, before you get all worked up, and the story is in SFW, no kidding, but and there were no teledildonics, if you've ever heard that term, or electroprobes or anything else you want to talk about. It was just the visual in the VR and them being, autoerotic. Yeah, it was enough said. So that's probably more imaginary than most people would be able to do to pretend to be a chest of drawers or doing whatever a chest of drawers could do to a television set. Like, ooh, adjust my antennas, set the contrast all the way up. Oh, yeah. But it does lead to an interesting thought about the future of fornicating and how people are not physically present could interact in, well, they say very strange ways. I mean, if you could change your sensory perception and actually be a bowl of soup and a stepladder getting frisky, that could be kind of weird. I'm sure somebody's going to try it for sure. And that's a news wrap-up for the week of 14 November 2021. I'll see you next week on Security Weekly News. I am not Satoshi Nakamoto, but Craig, send me some of those Bitcoins. That would be helpful. Thanks.